I see you two all the time, you thick as thieves you are. He must have said something.
Also, Warden. Not a word.
Lord, it's a miracle! Man up and vanished like a fart in the wind.
Shawshank was supposed to be a massive failure. It made only $327 in its opening weekend and landed in 13th place. Studios nearly pulled it from theaters completely. The director fell into deep depression, thinking his career was over. But then, one powerful man made a decision that saved the film. He aired it over and over on his network, sometimes twice a week. Critics called it obsessive. Fans called it genius. What he did next turned a box office disaster into the greatest movie of all time. Stephen King made a decision in 1987 that looked small on paper, but ended up changing film history forever. He sold the rights to his short story, Rita Hayworth, and Shawshank Redemption to Frank Darabont for just $5,000. But the real twist didn't come until years later. King never cashed the check. He didn't need the money. By then, he was already earning millions every year. So after the film came out in 1994 and slowly became a masterpiece, King framed the uncashed check and mailed it back to Darabont. He included a note that said, "In case you ever need bail money. Love, Steve." That one framed check became Darabont's most prized possession. He didn't care about Oscars. That check meant more than any trophy ever could. Back in 1983, Darabont was a complete unknown. Nobody in Hollywood knew his name. The only thing King had seen from him was a half-hour short film called The Woman in the Room, based on one of his stories. That was part of King's Dollar Baby program, which let student filmmakers adapt his work for just $1. Darabont had written a letter to King in 1980, begging for a chance. When he finally asked to adapt Shawshank, King didn't hesitate. But everyone else thought King had lost his mind. Darabont had no big movies, no real connections, and no one betting on him. But King believed in him more than anyone else. What made this even more surprising was how hard it had been just to get the story published in the first place. Different Seasons, the book that included Shawshank, almost never saw the light of day. King's own publishers told him it wouldn't sell. 4 novellas bundled together didn't make sense to them. They said it was too weird, too long to go in magazines, too short to sell as novels. And worst of all, they didn't like that the stories weren't horror. They wanted King to stick to what he was famous for. To get the book approved, King had to agree to include one creepy story at the end just to keep the publishers happy. That story was The Breathing Method. Without it, Shawshank might have stayed locked away in a drawer. But the emotional weight behind the story went even deeper. King wrote it during the darkest time in his life. In the early 1980s, he was addicted to everything. He drank heavily, snorted cocaine from plastic bags and bottles, chain-smoked, took pills like Xanax and Valium, and even downed NyQuil and Listerine. He was spiraling. He later said he didn't even remember writing whole books like Cujo. He was writing about hope and redemption while personally drowning in addiction. By 1987, his wife Tabitha had seen enough. She staged an intervention. She dumped every bottle, every bag, every Coke spoon caked with dried blood and mucus onto the floor. Friends and family stood there in silence. And that was the moment he realized he had to change. So Shawshank wasn't just a story. It was a way out of his own prison. When it came time to turn it into a movie, the drama didn't stop. Rob Reiner, who had directed Stand By Me, wanted to direct this one too. He offered Darabont $2.5 million just to step aside. He even planned to cast Tom Cruise as Andy and Harrison Ford as Red. Cruise had just come off The Firm and was one of the biggest stars in the world. If Darabont said yes, the movie would have had 2 A-list names and a proven director. But Darabont said no. He wanted to tell the story himself. He accepted only $750,000 and a cut of the profits just so he could keep creative control. At first, Cruise was actually interested. He came to table reads and seemed excited. But the more he thought about it, the more worried he became. He didn't trust Darabont. He thought the young director was too green, too untested. Cruise had worked with big names like Rob Reiner already. He didn't want to risk a project this big on a rookie. So he backed out. Darabont later said Cruise was brilliant and unfairly criticized, but that decision shaped everything. Then came Kevin Costner. At the time, he was flying high after Dances with Wolves. Darabont offered him the role of Andy too. But Costner passed. He went off to shoot Waterworld instead. That movie cost $170 million and barely made a profit. Meanwhile, Shawshank climbed its way to become the highest-rated film on IMDb. Years later, Costner admitted that his biggest regret wasn't even turning down Shawshank. It was turning down Platoon years earlier because of personal family reasons. But still, many saw Shawshank as the one that got away. Casting Red was just as complicated. In the original book, Red was a 57-year-old Irish-American with graying red hair. That's where the nickname came from. So when Rob Reiner was first involved, he had actors like Harrison Ford, Paul Newman, Robert Duvall, Gene Hackman, and Robert Redford in mind. Harrison Ford was his favorite, but one by one, they all passed. Robert Redford might have been too busy directing Quiz Show, which ended up competing with Shawshank at the 1994 Oscars. Clint Eastwood came close. He met with Darabont several times and liked the idea. But in the end, he said no. He felt his face was too familiar. He believed audiences would see Clint Eastwood and not Red. He didn't want to break the movie's emotional spell. Then Morgan Freeman read the script. He called it one of the best he'd ever seen. He didn't care what role it was, he just wanted in. But when he read the first page of the book and saw Red was Irish, he closed it. He said, "I can't play an Irishman." On top of that, he found the prison setting too depressing. He wasn't sure he could handle shooting something so bleak for months. Darabont had to call him personally. He read scene after scene out loud over the phone. That passion changed Freeman's mind. Even after that, Freeman had to audition 3 times. Studio executives weren't sure about his voice. They thought it might be too distracting. His voice was so powerful, they worried it would drown out the visuals. Each time, he had to record new narration segments to prove he could find the right balance. After the 3rd try, they finally said yes. That's how Freeman became Red. And in a quiet moment halfway through the movie, when Andy asks why he's called Red, Freeman smiles and says, "Maybe it's because I'm Irish." That one line was an inside joke. It honored King's original character while embracing the change. It was a wink to the book fans, but it worked for everyone. That line became one of the film's most quoted. One of the most haunted and brutal places ever used as a movie set was the Ohio State Reformatory, where they filmed The Shawshank Redemption in 1993. This wasn't just an abandoned prison. It was a place soaked in trauma. Over 200 men died there during its 94 years of operation. There were murders, suicides, and deaths from disease and neglect. When it closed in 1990, it was because a federal lawsuit said keeping 2,200 men in a space built for just 500 was nothing short of torture. Inside solitary confinement cells called the Hole, temperatures reached 95 degrees. One man murdered another in the pitch-black heat. Others lost their minds. When the film crew walked in 3 years later, they said the walls still felt like they were holding in pain. Frank Darabont said the entire cast felt it. He called it a heavy, dark feeling that you could actually feel sinking into the stone. When they started shooting in the summer of 1993, the place had no power, no heat, and no running water. Everyone was working 15 to 18-hour days, and all they had were generators and fire trucks pumping in water. The windows were broken, letting in all the weather. The East Wing had the world's largest steel cell block, 6 stories high, 100 cells per floor. It was rusted, crumbling, and full of peeling paint. Production designer Terrence Marsh said it didn't need any set dressing because it already looked like hell. It wasn't just the look that was dangerous. The place made people sick. The air was filled with asbestos and lead dust. There were sewage backups. Multiple crew members had to be treated for exposure. A chemist tested the water in one of the tunnels and told Tim Robbins it was lethal. Robbins refused to film in it until they dammed the stream and poured chlorine into it. But even then, it was still toxic. The scene where Andy escapes through the tunnel was shot with a fake mixture of chocolate syrup, sawdust, and water. But even that couldn't mask the real dangers. Crew members said the tunnel still smelled like cocoa decades later. Things got even worse when a fire nearly destroyed everything. During a break, Darabont and an extra named Michael C. Poole were heading out for coffee when they saw flames. A crew member had placed a hot lamp too close to some plastic sheeting over a window, and it had caught fire. If Darabont and Poole hadn't walked by when they did, the fire could have consumed the entire set, months of work, and the building itself. Castle Rock had spent a fortune rebuilding parts of the prison, and all of it nearly went up in smoke in just minutes. What gave the set even more of an edge was that many of the extras were real former inmates. The filmmakers couldn't find enough local people to fill the roles, so they went to halfway houses and hired men who had served time, some for violent crimes. One man who had actually served time in that very prison said the movie felt eerily accurate. The conversations, the way people stood, even the looks on their faces. The ex-cons knew exactly how to behave in prison because they didn't have to pretend. That made the set feel genuinely unsafe at times. Tim Robbins went deep into his character by spending hours in actual solitary confinement. He told the guards to treat him like a real prisoner. He sat in a tiny 6 by 8 foot cell with no sound, no people, and no distractions for several hours at a time. It shook him. He came out looking pale and disturbed. He later said it affected him more than he expected and gave him a sense of the desperation real inmates feel. Morgan Freeman hurt himself during one of the film's most peaceful scenes. In the scene where he's casually tossing a baseball with Andy, he had to throw that ball over and over again for 9 hours. Darabont wanted to shoot it from every angle. Freeman didn't complain once, but the next day he showed up wearing a sling. He couldn't lift his left arm. The pain lasted for weeks. James Whitmore, who played Brooks, insisted on working with the live crow himself. He was 73 years old. The bird, named Jake, was aggressive. It scratched and bit him. But Whitmore wouldn't use a stunt double. He said he had to bond with the bird to make Brooks believable. He even let the bird peck at his hand during the maggot scenes. He got scratched and bitten so many times that his hands were covered in small wounds, but he called them battle scars. Bob Gunton, who played the sadistic Warden Norton, paid a steep price for staying in character. The role got into his head. He stopped sleeping. He lost his appetite. He had stomach problems from stress and had to seek medical help. He said he didn't realize how much darkness he was carrying around until after filming ended. Even then, it took counseling to fully shake off the role. He later admitted that it changed how he thought about acting. Tim Robbins even trained as a real lockpicker. He worked with ex-cons and security experts to learn how to use real tools to open prison locks. He trained for months. The scene was cut from the final film, but Robbins had become so good at it that professional locksmiths said he could probably pick locks in real life. Ironically, he learned the same skill his character was supposed to have, and never even got to show it. When the film opened on September 23, 1994, the box office numbers were a disaster. It made only $727,300 across 33 theaters. That's about $22,000 per theater. For a $25 million movie with two major stars, this was a nightmare. It landed in 13th place that weekend and represented just 2.6% of the film's final gross. Castle Rock panicked. They almost pulled it from theaters entirely. The only thing that saved it was the reviews. Critics loved it. Audiences who saw it spread the word. Producer Liz Glotzer said the test screenings were the best they'd ever seen, but the low opening still crushed everyone. Then something strange happened. The movie started coming back, slowly. After it got nominated for 7 Oscars, theaters started showing it again in 1995. That's when people finally started to notice it. But in 1994, the competition was brutal. Forrest Gump had already made over $330 million and was still going strong. The Lion King had become the biggest animated film in history, making $763 million worldwide. Pulp Fiction opened the exact same day as Shawshank and took over everything. Even other hits like Speed, The Mask, True Lies, and Interview with the Vampire were dominating the box office. There simply wasn't any space for a quiet prison drama. Test screenings weren't all positive either. Some viewers walked out. They said it was too long, too depressing, too slow. Many complained there were no women in the film, which made it harder to market. Some said it didn't feel satisfying because the villain wasn't taken down in a loud or violent way. This feedback made it even harder to get theater owners on board. Frank Darabont took the failure personally. He said he went into a deep depression and thought he had ruined his career. He felt like he had let down Stephen King. He turned down other projects. He didn't know if he'd ever direct again. Every day felt like he had failed. It wasn't until later, when the movie became a hit on VHS and cable TV, that Darabont realized he hadn't made a failure. He had made something timeless. The Shawshank Redemption almost didn't survive Hollywood. When it first came out, it only made $16 million at the box office, even though it cost $25 million to make. But what started as a quiet disappointment slowly became one of the most beloved films in history. And the journey there is full of surprising turns, quiet battles, and incredible fan devotion. Frank Darabont, the film's director, had to walk a very careful line from the start. The MPAA gave the movie an R rating because of the strong language and prison violence. But behind the scenes, there were concerns it might get hit with an even harsher NC-17 rating. Darabont had filmed some very raw scenes, especially involving the character Boggs Diamond and the gang known as the Sisters. Their attacks on Andy were deeply disturbing. The hardest part for the filmmakers was dealing with scenes that suggested prison rape and brutal beatings by guards like Byron Hadley. The footage was intense, so Darabont edited them just enough to keep the message strong without crossing the line visually. He didn't want to lose the soul of the film, but he also knew it had to survive the rating board. Another choice that Darabont made was to never show the full details of Red's crime. In Stephen King's original novella, Red cut the brake lines of his wife's car to cash in on life insurance. But things went terribly wrong. His wife gave a ride to a friend and her baby, and all 3 of them died. That backstory never made it into the movie, and there's no real proof it was ever filmed. Instead, Red simply says he's the only guilty man in Shawshank. The focus stays on who he is now, not who he used to be. One of the film's most unforgettable scenes was also one of the most debated. Andy crawling through 500 yards of sewage to escape. What looks like raw waste was actually made of oatmeal, chocolate syrup, and a few other food items. Still, many people thought it was too gross. Studio execs worried that it might make people sick in the theater. But Darabont refused to cut it. He believed that moment, when Andy comes out of the pipe and raises his arms in the rain, was the entire point of the story. That suffering could lead to freedom. That rebirth only comes after something awful. That scene stayed in, just as he wanted. Some countries didn't take kindly to the film. Malaysia banned it at first because of its violence and harsh language. But what really stood out was what happened in China. In 2012, after blind human rights activist Chen Guangcheng escaped house arrest, the Chinese government blocked online searches for words like Shawshank, blind person, and embassy. Chen's escape reminded people of Andy's prison break, and the Chinese authorities didn't want anyone making that connection. Still, despite censorship, the film eventually found its way to China in a different form. In January 2024, a full stage play in Chinese premiered in Shenzhen, performed by Western actors. There were many scenes that never made it to theaters. Darabont filmed much more graphic content than what we saw. One deleted scene showed a prison guard following Andy's tunnel and vomiting from the smell. Then Red laughed so hard, he ended up in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. Another scene, called The Summer of Love, showed Red in the 1960s after his release, feeling overwhelmed by braless women and hippies, ending in a panic attack at the grocery store. Some of these scenes were so raw that Darabont didn't even include them in the DVD release. He later said he was embarrassed by a few. All of this might have faded into film history if not for Ted Turner. When he bought Castle Rock Entertainment in 1993, he accidentally ended up owning the rights to Shawshank. In June 1997, he made a bold decision. He began airing it on TNT over and over, sometimes twice a week or more. It was so frequent that people joked it played every 5 minutes. Turner loved the movie so much that he reportedly watched it 15 times himself. Because he owned both the studio and the channel, it was cheap for him to air it. But he could charge high prices for advertising. That endless replay made people notice the film again. Soon, it became one of the most watched movies on cable television. Darabont later said that Turner single-handedly saved the film from vanishing. It didn't stop there. In the mid-1990s, college students took over. They started organizing midnight screenings across American campuses. These were not studio events. Students did it themselves. They would pack into theaters at night just to watch it together. The tradition lasted for years, and some places still do it today. Students would gather in dorms and film clubs, quoting lines like, "Get busy living" or "Get busy dying." This movement turned into a massive wave. By 1995, it became the most rented VHS tape in the United States, with over 320,000 copies shipped. Then came the Oscars. In February 1995, the Academy shocked everyone by giving the movie 7 nominations. It was up for Best Picture, Best Actor for Morgan Freeman, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Score, and Best Sound. For a film that had only made $16 million, it was unbelievable. The buzz led to a re-release in theaters. It made another $12 million, pushing the total to $28.3 million. It didn't win any of the Oscars. Forrest Gump swept 6 of them, and Pulp Fiction took Best Screenplay. But Shawshank got something else: attention. The Oscar spotlight gave Warner Home Video a reason to send out those 320,000 VHS copies. They bet big, and it worked. Online, the story kept going. Shawshank became the first film ever to hit the #1 spot on IMDb, and it stayed there for more than 25 years. Over 3.1 million people have rated it, giving it a 9.3 average. It even beat The Godfather and The Dark Knight. Guinness World Records confirmed it on July 31, 2015, calling it the most popular film on IMDb. People who never saw it in theaters found it online and fell in love with it. Forums and early fan sites kept spreading the word. The internet gave it a second life. Outside of the US, the film found deep love in countries like Japan, Germany, and India. While it earned only $28.3 million at home, it made $45 million overseas, bringing the total to $73.3 million. In Japan, the themes of honor and quiet strength struck a deep chord. German audiences admired its layered storytelling. In India, film students and English-speaking viewers saw it as the perfect example of powerful cinema. Critics around the world praised how the film crossed cultures and how its message about hope could be felt anywhere. Even the smallest details carried meaning. The Bible that hid Andy's rock hammer wasn't cut randomly. It was carved starting at the book of Exodus, the story of slaves escaping bondage. It was a quiet reference to Andy's own escape from the prison. The word Exodus itself means departure. Darabont said he picked it on purpose. When the warden later finds the hammer there, it makes the line, "Salvation lies within," hit twice as hard. There were other subtle touches, too. The makeup team gave Tim Robbins dark circles under his eyes, only after nights when Andy would have been digging. It was their way of showing the toll of his double life without saying a word. They didn't age his face much, but they tracked the tiredness scene by scene. Some viewers wondered how Andy managed to reattach the poster over the hole after crawling into the tunnel. The answer was simple. He only taped the top corners, letting the bottom hang loose. That way, he could slip through and gravity would pull the poster back into place. If you look closely, you can see the corner hanging when the warden throws the rock through it. When Brooks was released from prison, he carved "Brooks was here" into the wall. Years later, Red did the same thing in the exact same spot. It wasn't a coincidence. It showed how institutionalization works the same way on different people. But unlike Brooks, Red finds Andy's letter and treasure. That changes everything. It gives him a reason to keep going. Even Andy's chess pieces had a secret. They matched the moves from a real chess game played in 1955. Some fans believe Andy's last name comes from that game's players. Whether or not that's true, it shows how much thought went into every detail. Andy wasn't just killing time. He was planning, piece by piece. And then there was the oak tree, the one Andy told Red to visit. That tree became real-life legend. It stood in Ohio for 200 years. But on July 29, 2011, it was hit by lightning. The strike split the tree in half, and ants had already hollowed out parts of it. It stood for 5 more years, until strong winds finally brought it down in July 2016. Locals turned the wood into collectibles. A simple keychain costs $40. A mini rock hammer sells for $85. A bottle opener is $130. And a shadow box with Andy's letter costs $500. The tree was fully removed in April 2017, but its memory lives on in pieces people can hold. The story of the Shawshank Redemption is really the story of second chances. A movie that almost disappeared. A man who crawled through hell. A film about hope that itself had to be rescued. It took clever editing, strange luck, college kids, and a man named Ted Turner watching it 15 times. But somehow, it made it. And just like Andy, it didn't just survive, it found freedom.